Она сейчас взорвется.
This story was never about making space look impressive. It wasn't designed to feel grand, futuristic, or safe. From the beginning, it was built around pressure, a world where survival came first and stability never lasted long enough to trust, where every jump drained resources, every decision carried consequences, and even success came with a cost. What audiences saw on screen was spectacle. What they didn't see was a production constantly fighting against time, money, expectations, and a system that wasn't prepared for what it had approved. Behind the uniforms and speeches was a project stretched beyond the limits of television, pulled into legal conflict, cut down at its peak, and quietly reshaped by decisions made far outside the story itself. It started as an event, it ended as a warning, and everything that followed left marks that lasted far longer than anyone expected. This is where it began. Number 1. An ambition too big for television. When the project was approved, it wasn't designed as a weekly television series. It was built like a feature film. The initial pilot was budgeted at a level television rarely touched at the time. Sets were constructed at near theatrical scale. Visual effects were planned to compete directly with what audiences were seeing in cinemas, not living rooms. That decision changed everything before a single episode aired. The cost immediately outpaced normal television economics. Advertising revenue alone couldn't justify the expense. The studio suddenly faced a problem that couldn't be solved by scheduling or promotion, so they made a move that quietly reshaped the project's identity. Before domestic audiences ever saw the show on television, the pilot was restructured into a theatrical cut and released internationally. It wasn't framed as a TV experiment. It was sold as a cinematic event. Financially, the gamble worked. Theatrical audiences responded. The release recovered a significant portion of the budget and relieved immediate pressure. Narratively, however, the damage was already done. To fit a standalone film format, characters were removed early. Entire arcs were cut short. One key antagonist was eliminated completely because the movie didn't need long-term conflict. When the television version arrived, that decision had to be undone. The character was restored. The story was reshaped, and the series inherited a contradiction at its core. A narrative born from a movie edit, forced to survive as episodic television. From the start, it wasn't just expensive. It was unstable, and that instability would follow it into everything that came next. Number 2. Success that arrived too fast. The project was never meant to live on a weekly schedule. The original concept was built around a small number of large-scale television movies, spaced out and carefully produced. Everything about the production reflected that plan. The sets were designed for long shoots. The effects pipeline assumed time, not urgency. The writing leaned toward epic structure, not episodic rhythm. Then the premiere aired. The audience response was immediate and overwhelming. Viewership surged far beyond network expectations. What was meant to be a limited event suddenly looked like a runaway success. Instead of relief, that success created panic. Executives didn't ask whether the production could sustain itself at that scale. They asked how quickly it could be expanded. Almost overnight, the original plan was abandoned. The limited run became a full weekly series. Deadlines collapsed. Turnaround times shrank to a fraction of what the project had been designed to handle. The system demanded speed. The production had been built for ambition. Cast and crew were pushed into a cycle that never slowed down. Scripts were rewritten under pressure. Effects were rushed. Long-term planning gave way to short-term survival. Ironically, the very thing that saved the project in the beginning, its massive success became the force that destabilized it. The show didn't fail because audiences rejected it. It began to fracture because it succeeded faster than the system around it could adapt. And once that pace was set, there was no way to reverse it. Number 3. A system designed to break. Once the weekly schedule was locked in, the production entered territory it was never built to survive. Everything moved at an unforgiving pace. Episodes were written, shot, and finished on a rolling deadline that left no room for correction. What would normally be refined over months had to be completed in days. The scale never shrank. Large sets remained active. Visual effects stayed complex. Costs stayed high. But time disappeared. Crew members worked extended hours without recovery. Departments overlapped, competing for the same resources. Creative decisions were made out of necessity, not intent. What held the project together wasn't planning. It was endurance. Ironically, that strain bled directly into the tone of the series. The sense of constant pressure, the feeling that everything could collapse at any moment, the exhaustion behind the performances, those elements weren't carefully engineered. They were a byproduct of a system stretched past its limits. Behind the scenes, morale fractured. Behind the camera, shortcuts became unavoidable. And behind the optimism of early success, the foundation was quietly eroding. The show still looked powerful on screen, but structurally, it was already failing. And the next conflict wouldn't come from inside the production at all. Number 4. When comparison turned into conflict. From the moment the series reached the screen, comparisons were unavoidable. The space battles felt familiar. The visual language echoed something audiences already knew. Those similarities weren't accidental. Many of the artists and technicians had worked on major science fiction films just years earlier. Techniques carried over. Visual instincts followed them. At first, the comparisons stayed in the press. Then they moved into court. A major studio accused the production of copying specific elements. Not inspiration. Not genre tradition. Direct imitation. The legal battle dragged on quietly, years longer than the show itself would last. Claims were dismissed, revived, narrowed, and threatened again. Behind closed doors, both sides understood the risk. A public trial would expose internal documents, shared personnel, and creative overlap no one wanted examined too closely. So the case ended without a clear winner. No public verdict, no dramatic judgment, but the damage was done. From that point forward, the series carried a label it never escaped. Not as a standalone creation, but as the show that was sued. That shadow followed it long after the cameras stopped rolling. Number 5. A detail that changed real-world rules. Merchandise was supposed to be simple. Toys designed to extend the fantasy beyond the screen. One product became an unexpected turning point. Small spacecraft toys were released with spring-loaded projectiles, marketed directly to children. They sold fast. They appeared everywhere. Then a tragedy occurred. A child misused the toy. The projectile became fatal. What followed wasn't quiet. It wasn't dismissible. It exposed a flaw that couldn't be ignored. A second incident confirmed it wasn't an accident. It was a design failure. The recall was immediate, one of the fastest in the industry's history. Lawsuits were settled quietly, but the consequences spread far wider. Safety commissions rewrote standards. New size limits were enforced. Entire categories of toy mechanisms were restricted. A product created to mimic fictional battles reshaped real-world safety laws. Long after the series ended, those rules remained. Number 6. When history interrupted fiction. The premiere was designed as an event, a long broadcast meant to fully immerse audiences. Then reality intervened. Midway through the airing, the network cut away for a live presidential address. A major diplomatic announcement took priority. Viewers were confused. Some believed they had lost the ending forever. Phone lines flooded. Stations scrambled to respond. The network eventually rebroadcast the entire episode just to restore trust. But the interruption revealed something larger. Overseas, critics interpreted the series through a political lens. The enemy wasn't seen as fictional. It was read as symbolic. What had been written as entertainment became entangled in global tension. Cold War anxieties were projected onto characters that were never meant to carry them. Without intending to, the show had crossed from fiction into ideology. And once that line was crossed, there was no pulling it back. Number 7. A slot designed to strangle momentum. By the time the series settled into its weekly run, another problem had already been locked in. Scheduling. The network placed the show against one of the strongest programs on television, a proven ratings giant with a loyal, immovable audience. For an effects-heavy series with enormous costs, consistency mattered. But the time slot offered none. Ratings fluctuated wildly. A strong episode could still look weak next to its competition. Every dip felt more dangerous than it should have. Inside the production, ambition continued to rise. Episodes grew more complex. Stories aimed higher, but the audience never had a stable place to find them. Whether by strategy or neglect, the result was the same. The show was trapped in a battle it could not win. And once momentum was lost, recovery became nearly impossible. Number 8. Cancelled without an ending. Despite the instability, the audience was still there. Viewers tuned in. The world felt large enough to continue. Then the decision came. The series was cancelled after a single season. No build-up, no final chapter. No chance to resolve what had been set in motion. The reaction was immediate. Fans wrote letters. Petitions circulated. Protests followed. For the first time, it became clear that the network had underestimated the attachment forming around the show. The studio recognized the mistake too late. They searched for a way to bring the franchise back. Not because the story was finished, but because the audience refused to let it disappear. The solution was revival. But revival under pressure rarely preserves what mattered most. Number 9. A second life that lost its identity. The attempt to continue the story began with bold ideas: time travel, new settings, a chance to expand the universe in unexpected directions. Then fear intervened. Executives worried the concept was too strange, too ambitious, too risky for the slot they wanted to fill. Overnight, the vision was rewritten. What emerged was smaller, suffer, stripped of the mythology that defined the original. Production shortcuts became obvious. Reused footage, simplified stories, a tone that no longer matched the world it came from. Viewers noticed immediately. The revival collapsed quickly, canceled again before it could find its footing. The franchise had survived cancellation once. The second time, it barely resembled itself. But even then, the story still wasn't finished. Number 10. A world that was never explained. From the beginning, the series refused to translate itself for the audience. It didn't pause to define its culture. It didn't simplify its language. Measurements, rituals, and customs were introduced without explanation. Viewers were expected to keep up or fall behind. This wasn't confusion by accident. It was a deliberate choice. Instead of borrowing familiar structures from Earth, the creators built a civilization with its own internal logic. Military hierarchy, religious influence, unspoken traditions that shaped behavior rather than dialogue. Even profanity was reinvented. A single invented word slipped past broadcast standards and became a pressure valve for emotion the network wouldn't otherwise allow. What made this approach unusual wasn't complexity, it was trust. The show trusted viewers to adapt, and that trust created a sense of authenticity rarely seen in television at the time. The world felt lived in because it didn't wait for permission to exist. Number 11. Limitations that created mystery. Despite the scale of the universe, audiences only ever saw one major vessel in detail. The rest existed only in dialogue. This wasn't a narrative choice. It was a budget reality. There was only enough money to build and maintain a single, fully realized model. Every other ship had to remain off-screen. Instead of weakening the story, that absence did something unexpected. It created mystery. Names of other vessels were spoken casually, as if they were already known. Their crews were implied. Their fates left unanswered. The result was a universe that felt larger than what the camera could show. Fans filled in the gaps themselves. Speculation became engagement. Silence became scale. A limitation designed by cost ended up strengthening immersion. Number 12. A performance that was never meant to be human. One of the strangest figures in the series wasn't mechanical at all. It was alive. What appeared on screen as a robotic companion was performed by a trained animal inside a costume. Movement was restricted. Vision was limited. Heat and discomfort were constant challenges. The performer didn't hit marks cleanly, didn't behave predictably, didn't move like a machine. And that was the point. Those imperfections gave the character a warmth no animatronic system could provide at the time. Small hesitations, unplanned gestures, moments of curiosity. The crew adapted their filming to the performer's rhythm rather than forcing control. The result was something audiences remembered long after the technology aged. A machine that felt strangely alive. Not because it was programmed well, but because it wasn't programmed at all. Number 13. One actor, two faces of evil. One performer shaped the series' sense of menace in two very different forms. On screen, he appeared as a calm, composed antagonist, measured, charismatic, dangerous without raising his voice. But audiences heard him again in another role, one stripped of humanity entirely. Through heavy vocal processing, that same actor became the voice of the enemy's highest authority. Cold, echoing, mechanical. The series never stated a connection between the two characters. It didn't need to. The shared presence created an unease that lingered beneath the story, as if human ambition and inhuman control were two sides of the same force. That overlap wasn't explained in dialogue. It was felt. By placing the same voice behind both threats, the show suggested something more unsettling than any direct reveal: that the greatest danger didn't belong to machines or people alone, but to the space where they overlapped. Number 14. A legend who changed the tone. A late career appearance by a Hollywood legend was never meant to be more than a novelty. A brief role, a quiet surprise. The reason was simple. His grandchildren loved the show, and he wanted to give them something personal. What the production received instead was one of its most grounded performances. Rather than leaning into spectacle, he brought warmth, calm, emotional gravity. The episode built around him slowed the pace of the series. For a moment, the universe stopped expanding outward and turned inward. Audiences expecting a cameo watched something else entirely. A reminder that even inside a story built on survival and conflict, humanity could still surface. It became one of the most remembered episodes, not because of scale, but because of restraint. Number 15. When a universe leaked into another. When the creator moved on to a new project, the influence followed him. Visual language carried over. A scanning red light became the signature feature of a new machine. Sound effects were reshaped, but not replaced. What had once represented space combat now signaled speed and power on Earth. Even small references slipped through. Acostumi, a sound cue, a quiet acknowledgement for those paying attention. The new series wasn't a continuation, but the creative DNA remained. The earlier universe didn't end. It dispersed. Its influence lived on in form, rhythm, and design, long after its original story was cut short. Number 16. A name that escaped the screen. Long after the series ended, its influence surfaced in an unexpected place. When a new fighter jet entered service, pilots ignored its official designation. To them, the aircraft felt familiar, fast, aggressive, built for close combat. They gave it a nickname drawn directly from the show. The name spread informally at first, through squadrons, through training bases, through casual use. Eventually, it became permanent. Awards, call signs, and internal traditions adopted the name without explanation. New pilots learned it as part of the culture, often without knowing where it came from. A series that lasted only one season ended up naming one of the most recognizable aircraft in modern military aviation. Not through marketing, not through intent, but because the people who flew it felt the connection was right. This project never fit the system that carried it. It was too ambitious for television, too expensive to protect, too complex to control. Some ideas collapsed under pressure, others survived in fragments. A few took decades to be understood. What remained wasn't a perfect series. It was a record of people trying to build something larger than the space they were given. That effort didn't disappear when the show ended. It scattered into other stories, other designs, other worlds. Some creations fade when they're cut short. Others simply wait for the signal to return. And this one never really left. If you're looking for the best way to experience Battlestar Galactica 1978 beyond streaming, the DVD edition is still the most complete version available. The link below leads to official and trusted DVD editions, preserving the original episodes, pacing, and details that often get lost over time. For anyone who values classic television, physical media, and stories that almost disappeared, this is the most reliable way to own the series.